It was an experience like nothing else that I've had, or I believe anybody can have as a pianist. To see him playing live, whether solo or trio, was a completely transcendent experience. When you walked in and heard him play, first of all, you couldn't believe that it was just a piano, and it was just one guy. He created, in the theater, he created like a cathedral of sound. So it wasn't just a guy playing jazz, it was a guy creating a cathedral of sound. And he would create this cathedral just like you would create a regular cathedral, in that there would be levels and layers to it. So, in a cathedral, you might have the floor might be nice, and maybe the pews, or and then up higher would be the stained glass, and then sometimes a beautiful ceiling like this. But there are layers that catch your attention and that make up the whole thing. When you heard Keith Jarrett play, it was layered sound. And one of the first things I noticed when I actually heard him in person was that he was very conscious and aware of the ring of the notes he was playing. Most pianists, when they play, are focused on the hit of the notes, because that's what we have to do as jazz pianists, is create something in the moment and hit the notes and make music out of thin air. So that's a tall order to start with. But Keith was not only focused at that level, but he was way above that level, and he was able to have certain notes. So if you heard him playing, maybe there were 8 notes going on at the same time, but they weren't 8 notes sounding the same. They were 8 notes where some of the notes were being held and some of the notes were moving. And he could hear all the distinctions between the notes that were held and moving, and he could sustain 4 or 5 or who knows how many levels of different sounds at the same time. And once he created a kind of a layer of sound, let's say it was the melody would just pop out at you like a freight train. It would be just a singing melody, and it would just be with oftentimes one note. I mean, he'd obviously do things with multiple notes, but a lot of times in the melody, he could even do one note, and he would sustain that one note sound and timbre and quality with nuances, and that would be the top layer, like the stained glass part of the cathedral. And then he'd have all these other layers underneath that singing melody that might be moving just in certain rates of speed, and everything was perfectly balanced with each other. And he was doing this on the spot. And so what you heard is a layered sound of completely controlled different musical functions, all going on at the same time, being created by one person at the same time. You could think a little bit like an organ, like a pipe organ, because a pipe organ, you can create lots of different sounds, and you can have the bass pedals going and so on. So it's a layered sound with lots of nuance and different shades. Keith was able to get that all from a piano. So just to hear his ability to balance everything, and his attention to having different layers with different musical functions. It was like that guy, the guy on the Ed Sullivan Show, who started out juggling with just a bowling pin, and then he would do 2 bowling pins, and then he would have like a chainsaw on top of that, and then a basketball on top of that. He'd be able to keep all the things in the air at the same time. I mean, I've heard him play a 3 hour. He'd play long concerts because you do a lot of encores. He would do 5, 6, 7 encores sometimes. And I've heard him play like at Carnegie Hall, and it would end up being 3 hours. And every single note that he played was perfect. From the beginning, the first note, until the very last note of the last piece. Like the last note of the last piece was not just a note. It had some nuance to it. It had something that he was trying to give it an inflection that was special at that moment. So I've seen like 3 hours of perfection. And the thing that's so uncanny was that the term human and the term perfection are really not supposed to go together. But when you heard Keith play, for the most part, it did. And that was stunning, absolutely stunning, to hear somebody creating something in the moment that was so complex and to have such control over it and to project it. And then there's the whole other art form of how you project your music into a hall. So I saw him in different halls, like like in Carnegie Hall, and then he played in New Jersey at the New Jersey
Peck.
Performing Arts Center, other places. And he was able to fit his sound into the hall perfectly. So whether you were in the top row or right in front of him, the sound was magnificent. So, I mean, this is not even talking about any of these are just overriding things, impressions from hearing him.
Yeah.
I got done with one concert in Carnegie Hall that he did. I think it might have been the last one he did, which might have been 2017, if I'm correct. I'm not sure about that. But it was a solo concert, and after it was finished, I had the impression that every other piano player in the world was like an amoeba, and Keith was like Einstein. It was completely off the charts. He had things that he would do, kind of his style of playing, but he had less of a style than anyone I ever heard. Meaning that you would hear him and he would be creating musical textures and have different ways of playing every concert. He wouldn't sound the same. He wouldn't sound even close to the same. He would have a whole different thing that he was creating in the moment, and that I've never heard. So when you hear all the great jazz pianists or performers, they have a kind of a style. Most people have a style when they play, but Keith, he had things that he would do that you would recognize it was Keith, but he would be literally creating new musical tableaus whenever he played. Something new, texturally new, something different. And that was also amazing. And if you want to talk about, like, pianistically, his touch was beyond description, how he was able to create different sounds from one note or project a certain quality, emotional quality through his touch was off the charts. And then from every other aspect of playing, his voicings that he uses are just incredibly complex and nuanced at times, very simple at other times, but he does things with voicings that I've never heard anybody else do. And it's all this at one. And then he can play like every style. So you'd hear him play a solo concert or a trio concert, and he'd be playing boogie, and he'd play the shit out of a boogie like you never heard. And then he would play the most beautiful ballad that you've ever heard in your entire life, bar none. And then he would play like a real swing and bebop kind of thing. And then he would create like an impressionistic kind of thing, all with his own particular way of nuancing it. And you'd hear one after another, like perfect ballad, perfect bebop, perfect boogie. And like the energy was amazing. So, I mean, this was really a phenomenon. The only way I could even try to understand Keith Jarrett is to remember that somebody like Beethoven also existed. That's the only way I could, as a pianist, as somebody spending their life in the field, to hear Keith Jarrett play, you don't even know what it is. And then, like, I remembered, a guy named Beethoven existed who was able to write symphonies and, a whole ton of music that was just amazing, one guy. And so, like, that kind of I put it in that category.